So how does your computer actually use TLS? In other words, if you're just a random user browsing the internet, how does TLS affect you? How do you know if you're using TLS? This is something that the browser can tell you. And if you've ever seen those little lock icons in the corner of the browser, that's how you know whether or not you're using TLS. Now, an interesting case study in user design, and this is another point for how real-world business decisions affect TLS design, is how browsers convinced websites to adopt TLS. So this is kind of a cute story. So originally, when TLS was first being introduced, what web browsers would do is they would show a lock icon if the website was connected to using TLS. And if you were using plain TCP, then they would not show you the lock icon. So as an example, this is the original design of the internet. If you visit something using HTTP, no lock icon. If you visit using HTTPS, you get this little lock icon. And that was how users would figure out whether or not they were using HTTPS. So that was nice. Now, one downside of this design is that users who don't know any better might be tricked into thinking that this lock icon means that security is guaranteed. So if a user doesn't know about TLS and what it means, they might see this lock icon and immediately think everything is secure, so I can type in my password, I can type in my social security number, everything is good because the magical lock icon has appeared. But remember, the lock icon doesn't necessarily mean you've achieved all security. It just means that your messages are being encrypted with TLS. So for example, if you made a TLS connection to www.evil.com, you would see the lock icon because you're using TLS, but that doesn't mean you're secure. You're still talking to an attacker. So we have to be careful with this lock icon. If we don't contextualize it properly, it could trick users into thinking that their connection is secure, even though it's not. So the lock icon does mean that your messages are encrypted using TLS. But users might be fooled into thinking the website must be trustworthy because I see the lock, therefore I can celebrate and start typing in all of my most precious secrets. But that's not always true. For example, if you visit evil.com using TLS, you see the lock icon, but you're still talking to an attacker. Or even worse, if you visit an attacker's website, they could add their own fake lock icon, and that might trick users into thinking that they're secure, even though they're not. So when browsers design the user interface for how to show users if they're using TLS, these are the things they had to consider. How do you train users who are not security aware to use TLS? And how do we make sure we're not telling them the wrong thing? Those are all things that browser designers had to think about. Now, fast forward to the present day, the modern design of browsers is actually a little bit different. So originally, remember that no TLS meant you don't get any icon, and TLS means you get a lock icon. So that was the original design. Now, if you look at a modern browser, the design has actually been flipped. So nowadays, if you visit something with TLS, you still get the lock icon. But instead of showing nothing if you visit an insecure website, you actually get this no lock icon. It says not secure. So in addition to showing the lock icon, modern browsers actually show a not secure icon if you're using HTTP. So why did browsers decide to do this? Well, first, it gives users more information. Now if a user visits something insecure, because they're not using TLS, they get this explicit icon. But a funny side effect of this design is that it forced more websites to adopt HTTPS and TLS. Imagine if you're a bank website and your server doesn't run TLS. You haven't implemented it, and you don't have the code for TLS. You haven't upgraded your server. In the old design, if someone visited your non-TLS bank website, they would just see bank.com in the address bar, and they wouldn't get the lock icon. But now, if someone visits your insecure bank.com website and you don't have TLS enabled, every user who goes to your bank website sees this insecure icon of doom. And all of the users who would otherwise be using your bank website, they might see this icon, they might get scared, and they might switch to a different bank. So by adding this lock icon that says this connection is not secure, we're actually encouraging websites and servers to adopt HTTPS. Because if you're running a company or a business, you don't want all of your users to see this terrible icon on your website. You want them to see this nice icon. So this is a good way to encourage businesses to make that switch and adopt HTTPS for their servers. That's kind of a cool side effect where technology affected business practices. We're forcing everyone to move toward HTTPS.